The moment my mother-in-law's hand connected with my 9-year-old daughter's face is something I will never be able to unhear. It was a flat, hard sound, the kind that doesn't belong anywhere near a child, and it split the air at the Christmas dinner table like something breaking that cannot be fixed. Olivia stumbled sideways. The cup of hot chocolate she had been holding tipped and splashed across the white tablecloth, and 15 people sat there watching it spread like a stain and did not move. My husband James stood by the kitchen doorway with his hands at his sides. My father-in-law Raymond stared at his plate. My sister-in-law Claire looked down at her phone. The only sound was the grandfather clock in the hallway and my daughter trying to decide if she was allowed to cry. I did not scream. I did not cry either. I crossed the room, knelt beside Olivia, checked her face with both hands. Her cheek was already blooming red. She was looking at me with those enormous brown eyes, the ones that always asked the questions she could not say out loud, and she whispered something so small I almost missed it. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to spill it." She was apologizing. She was apologizing for being hit. I stood up. I picked up my purse from the back of the chair. I reached inside and set a single envelope on the table in front of my mother-in-law, right next to her untouched dinner plate. I looked at her and I said 4 words, quietly, the way you say something when you have already decided everything. "I have the recordings." Her fork dropped. I had been carrying that envelope for 3 weeks. I had been carrying those 4 words even longer. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that I had not come to this dinner unprepared. I had come to this dinner for the last time. I carried my daughter out of that house without looking back once. The drive home was quiet, the way a held breath is quiet. Olivia sat in the back seat with her seatbelt on and her hands folded in her lap, and she watched the streetlights pass over her face in long yellow lines. The mark on her cheek had darkened by the time we pulled into our driveway. Our house was dark. We were supposed to be at my mother-in-law's until 9. It was barely 6:30. I gave Olivia a bath. I examined her cheek under the bathroom light, the bright, unforgiving kind, and I took photographs from 4 different angles. She watched me do this without asking why. She was 9 years old, and she already understood that some things needed to be documented. That broke something open in me that I could not name. Later, I tucked her into bed and she asked me the question I had been dreading since the moment we walked out of that house. "Mom, why does Grandma Nancy hate me?" I sat on the edge of her mattress and I took her hands in mine. I told her that some people's hearts had doors that were too small to let everyone in. I told her it was not her fault. I told her that I had never once believed the things Nancy said about her, not for a single day. She looked at me the way children look when they are measuring whether they can trust what they are hearing. Then she asked, "Is it because I'm not Dad's real daughter?" That question sat in the room with us for a long time. I pulled her against me and held her until her breathing slowed and she fell asleep with her face pressed into my shoulder. Then I sat at the kitchen table, alone in the dark, with my phone showing 41 missed calls. And I let myself feel exactly one thing clearly. I was done being patient. I need to go back a little so you understand what I mean when I say that envelope had been 3 weeks in the making. Olivia is my daughter from a relationship before James. Her biological father left before she was born and has never been part of her life. When James and I got together 4 years ago, Olivia was 5. She called him by his first name for the first year. And then, one afternoon, out of nowhere, she started calling him Dad. And James cried in the kitchen where he thought she couldn't see. He loved her. That was never the question. The question was his mother. Nancy had a way of making things clear without saying them directly. She was excellent at indirection. The Christmas before last, when the cousins gathered to open gifts under her 12-foot tree with its real pine smell and professional ribbon, Olivia received a $15 gift card to a craft store. Her cousins, Nancy's biological grandchildren, received tablets and gaming consoles and a weekend trip to see a Broadway show. Olivia said thank you in her small, careful voice. In the car on the way home, she asked me if she had done something wrong, and I lied to her and said, "No, you're wonderful. Grandma Nancy just doesn't know you as well yet." I hated myself for that lie. There was a wall of photographs in Nancy's house. A long hallway lined with matching silver frames. I counted them once. 43 photographs. Every birthday, every school play, every vacation. James as a boy. Claire's children. Raymond at some anniversary dinner. I counted every face in every photograph. Olivia appeared in none of them. 3 years of holidays. 3 years of being brought to that house, sitting at that table, being present in that family's life. Not one photograph. When I mentioned it to James, he said his mother was old-fashioned. She would come around, give her time. I gave her 3 years. Time ran out the night her hand connected with my daughter's face over a seat at the Christmas dinner table. What started this particular evening was a chair. One chair. Olivia had sat down in the seat beside James, which happened to be the seat that Nancy's granddaughter Sophie usually used. Sophie wasn't there yet. Olivia didn't know. The moment Nancy walked into the dining room and saw Olivia in that seat, her face changed in a way I had learned to recognize. That particular tightening around the eyes, the flattening of the mouth. And she told Olivia in a voice like polished steel that she was sitting in someone else's place. Olivia said she was sorry and started to get up. Nancy said it too slowly for it to be an accident. She said it's too late, it's already ruined, and then she hit her. An open hand, hard enough to move her sideways, hard enough that the cup fell. And 15 adults sat there and watched. I have thought about that moment every day since. Not the slap. I have processed the slap. I have filed it where it belongs, into the category of things I will not allow to touch us anymore. What I think about is the silence. 15 people. Not one of them moved. Not James. Not Claire. Not Raymond, who was the only one who looked ashamed. Though shame without motion is just a performance, and Raymond had been performing for a long time, that silence told me everything I needed to know about the family I had been trying to fit my daughter into for 3 years. The 4 words I said at the table, I have the recordings, were not a bluff. 3 weeks before Christmas, I had found something that changed everything. I was cleaning out the office closet, one of those Sunday afternoon projects that starts as organizing and ends as archaeology, when I found a cardboard box pushed into the far back corner behind James's old law school textbooks. The box had his father's handwriting on the outside. Raymond. Personal. I almost put it back. Then I noticed it had been opened and resealed with fresh tape recently. I opened it. Inside was a folder of documents from an attorney's office. I recognized the letterhead. Whitfield and Associates, the firm that had handled Raymond's father's estate when he died 2 years ago. I remembered James mentioning the estate briefly, something about a trust for the grandchildren's education. I remembered asking whether Olivia was included. I remembered James saying he assumed so. His mother was handling the details. The folder told a different story. Reginald Marsh, James's grandfather, a man I had met exactly once before he died. A quiet man who had sat beside Olivia at the 4th of July barbecue 2 summers ago and spent an entire hour listening to her explain the plot of her favorite book, had established an educational trust worth $380. The original document listed 3 beneficiaries: James's nephew Owen, James's niece Sophie, and Olivia Jane Marsh. He had used James's last name. He had specifically added her. I sat on the closet floor and read that name 4 times. Then I opened the second document, an amendment, dated 6 months after Reginald died. Olivia's name was gone. Her share had been redistributed. The reason given was one line: beneficiary not a biological descendant of the grantor. Reginald's original trust contained no such requirement. That language had been added afterward. At the bottom of the amendment were 2 signatures, Nancy Marsh as trustee and Claire Marsh as witness. I sat in that closet for a long time. Then I started making phone calls. The attorney I found was named Patricia Howe, 15 years in estate litigation. When I explained the situation on the phone, she asked me one question: "What evidence do you have?" I said I have the original trust and the amendment in a letter addressed to guardians of all beneficiaries that I never received. She said, "Send me everything." I did. What she found in the following 3 weeks made the amendment look like the least of it. The trust had been worth $380,000 when Reginald died. The current balance was $11,240. I am going to let that number sit for a moment. Nancy had spent $368,000 in 2 years. Patricia mapped every transaction, private school tuition for Sophie and Owen, but with significant overages deposited directly into Nancy's personal account. A kitchen renovation. A car. Travel described in the records as educational enrichment activities that corresponded exactly with the cruise Nancy took to the Mediterranean the previous fall, and Olivia's original $126,000 share, gone as if it had never existed, because as far as Nancy's paperwork was concerned, it hadn't. The envelope I placed on the table at Christmas dinner contained a formal notice of Patricia's representation and a demand for full accounting of all trust expenditures within 10 days. It was not a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a signal. I have the recordings. What I didn't tell Nancy that night was what the recordings actually were. Reginald Marsh had recorded 3 conversations with Nancy in the 6 months before his death. He had a small device he kept in his shirt pocket. He told me this himself at that 4th of July barbecue. Not about the recordings, but about Nancy. We were sitting in lawn chairs watching Olivia and the other kids run through a sprinkler, and he said to me, without any preamble, that he wanted to make sure Olivia was taken care of. I thought he was being sentimental. I thanked him and said she was fine. We were fine. He shook his head and said he knew his daughter-in-law. He said, "I'm going to do what I can from my end. But I need you to promise me something. Don't let her erase your daughter." I promised him. I didn't understand what he meant yet. He died 3 months later. A heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, James said. Olivia asked if she could go to the funeral. Nancy said it would be too upsetting for the children. By children, she meant her biological grandchildren. Olivia was seated in the back row behind the extended family, so far from the front that she might as well have been a stranger who had wandered in from the street. I got the recordings through Raymond. The week after Christmas, when I was still processing everything, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It said, "This is Raymond. Can we meet? I know something you need to see. Don't tell James or Nancy." We met at a diner 2 towns over. Raymond arrived early and was already sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall and a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. He looked like a man who had been deciding something for a very long time and had finally decided. He put an envelope on the table and slid it across to me. He said, "My father gave this to me 6 months before he died. He told me to open it if Nancy ever did something unforgivable." I looked at Raymond. I said, "And hitting a 9-year-old isn't enough?" He closed his eyes. He said, "I've been sitting in that house for 31 years telling myself she didn't mean it, that she'd change, that it wasn't as bad as it looked." He paused. "I watched my granddaughter get hit at a Christmas table and I did nothing." He looked at me. "I'm done doing nothing." Inside the envelope were 2 things. A handwritten letter from Reginald. The handwriting shaky but completely legible, addressed to me by name, and a small USB drive. The letter said that if I was reading it, things had gone the way he feared they would. That he had loved Nancy once, genuinely, but that love with conditions attached is not love. It's leverage. That Olivia deserved better than a family that would argue about her right to exist in it. That he had created a separate protected account with $40,000 specifically for Olivia's education, held by a neutral trustee, completely outside Nancy's reach. And that on the USB drive were recordings that would, in his words, make everything very clear. I read the letter twice. My hands were shaking. I asked Raymond if he would testify. He said yes. He said it's the least I can do after 31 years. I listened to the recordings in my car in the diner parking lot. 3 of them. In the first, Reginald told Nancy clearly that he wanted Olivia included in the trust by name. Nancy said she wasn't biological family. Reginald said that didn't matter to him. Nancy said it would matter to everyone else. Reginald said, "Then everyone else is wrong," and I'm the one writing the trust. In the third recording, the one dated 2 months before his death, Reginald's voice was weaker. He told Nancy that he knew she was planning to change the trust after he was gone. Nancy laughed. She said he was being paranoid, the medication was affecting his thinking. Reginald said, "I'm dying, Nancy. I'm not confused." A pause. Then Nancy said something I have since played for 3 different people who all heard the same thing. "Then I suppose once you're gone, it won't matter what you wanted." I sat in that parking lot for a long time. I forwarded everything to Patricia that afternoon. James and I had been moving around each other like polite strangers since Christmas. He had come home the night of the dinner after Olivia was already asleep, and we had a conversation in the kitchen that I do not want to reproduce in full because parts of it are too painful and parts of it are too personal, and parts of it were things said in exhaustion that he has since recanted. What I will say is that he was not dismissive. He was fractured. He kept saying, "I know, I know, I know," and then running his hand through his hair in the way he did when he was trying to find words that didn't exist yet. I asked him one question, and I asked it only once. I said, "Did you know about Olivia being removed from the trust?" He couldn't meet my eyes. I said, "That's enough." He slept in the guest room for 11 days. On the 12th day, he came to me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, and he said he had called Patricia's office and asked to be included in the legal action. He said his mother was not going to get away with what she had done. He said, and this was the thing that mattered most, the thing I had been waiting to hear. He said, "I let her treat Olivia like she was optional. That is something I have to live with. I'm not going to add to it." He had also, that same week, found a phone number he had not dialed in 9 years. His brother Thomas. Thomas Marsh had left this family 11 years ago under circumstances that James had never fully explained to me. What I knew was that there had been a falling out, that Nancy had been at the center of it, and that Thomas had been effectively excommunicated. His name removed from family photographs, his calls unreturned, his existence treated as a closed subject. James had been 26 when it happened and had absorbed the lesson his mother intended. Compliance meant belonging. Defiance meant erasure. He called Thomas on a Sunday afternoon, and I sat in the living room and listened without meaning to. The conversation was short and awkward at first, the way conversations are after 9 years of silence. Then Thomas said, "I always thought you'd call eventually. I just didn't know what it would take." James came into the living room afterward and sat down on the couch and stared at the wall for a while. Then he said, "She did the same thing to him that she did to Olivia. Thomas was with someone she didn't approve of. She gave him a choice, and he chose wrong, according to her. So she made him disappear." He looked at me. He said, "I watched her do it, and I didn't say anything because I was 26 and I was scared of losing what she could take from me." He paused. "I'm 37 now. I have a daughter who is learning what family is by watching what I do." That was the moment I believed him. The deposition was in February. Patricia had arranged everything in a conference room that felt more deliberate than any space I had been in. Documents color-coded, a timeline projected on the wall, a court reporter in the corner with her hands poised above her machine. Nancy arrived with her attorney, a man named Gerald, who wore expensive suits and spoke in the tone of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. Nancy herself was immaculate. Pearls, hair perfect. She walked in like she was attending a board meeting she had already won. I watched her hands. They were gripping her pen too tight. Patricia started with the trust documents. She walked through them with methodical, unhurried precision. The original trust, the amendment, the beneficiary list, the deletion of Olivia's name. Nancy's explanations were prepared, practiced. She said the amendment reflected Reginald's true intentions. She said Reginald had been confused in his final months. She said she had simply clarified what he would have wanted. Patricia produced Reginald's handwritten notes, verified by a forensic document examiner, from the week before the amendment was filed. They said, in his own handwriting, Olivia is to remain on the trust. Nancy will push back. Hold firm. Nancy's composure flickered. Just slightly. Just enough. Then Patricia played the recordings. Reginald's voice filled the conference room, thin and clear. I watched Nancy's face as her husband's voice said he wanted Olivia protected, and her own voice replied that it mattered to the family legacy. I watched her face when the third recording played, the one where she said, "Once you're gone, it won't matter what you wanted." The court reporter had stopped typing. Gerald was writing furiously. Nancy stared at the table. The door opened. Raymond walked in. Nancy said his name in a voice I had never heard from her before. He did not look at her. He sat down across the table and asked to make a statement on the record. Patricia nodded. Gerald started to object. Patricia said he was a relevant witness to trust administration matters and his testimony was permissible. Raymond said, "My name is Raymond Marsh. I have been married to Nancy Marsh for 31 years. He paused. Was married. I filed for separation last week. Nancy made a sound. Raymond continued without looking at her. He said he had known about the trust amendment when it was filed. He said he had told himself it was a family matter and not his place to interfere. He said he had watched his father-in-law spend his final months trying to protect a child who deserved protection, and he had done nothing, and he was not going to sit in silence anymore." He handed Patricia a folder. Inside were account transfers. Patricia had not yet found. An additional $47,000 moved in small increments to an account held under Nancy's maiden name. He said he had found them by accident 3 weeks ago and had spent every day since deciding what to do. He looked at Nancy for the first time. He said, "You spent 30 years telling me I was protecting this family. I was just protecting you." Then he stood up and walked out. The room was quiet for a long time. Gerald requested a recess. Patricia granted 10 minutes with a smile that was not warm but was deeply satisfied. During those 10 minutes, I stepped into the hallway and James was waiting there. He had known Raymond was coming. I had told him the night before, quietly, in the kitchen after Olivia went to sleep. He had been silent for a moment and then nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when they are accepting something they cannot change. He said, "How is she doing?" "Meaning Olivia," I said. "She's been sleeping through the night again. She argued with me about her bedtime last week for 20 minutes. He almost smiled. He said, "That's good. That's really good." We went back in for the second half of the deposition. The next significant development came from Claire. Claire had been the witness who signed the trust amendment. She had also, I suspected, known significantly more about the financial situation than she had ever indicated. 2 weeks after the deposition, I received a phone call from her. Her voice sounded nothing like it usually did, stripped of the practiced social warmth, flat and exhausted. She said, "I found out 2 days ago that Mom used my signature to refinance her house. I did not authorize it. I did not sign anything. She did it anyway. The same pattern, different target." Claire spent the next hour telling me things I had not known. That she had been the one who drafted the trust amendment paperwork at Nancy's direction, told it was a technicality, told to sign and not ask questions. That Nancy had been managing a college fund for Sophie that Claire had contributed to for 6 years, $84,000 total, and which currently held $9,000. That she had tried twice to ask her mother about the fund and had been called ungrateful and dramatic and told she was damaging family unity. She said, "I thought I was her good daughter. I was just the most cooperative one." She agreed to testify. She said she would say whatever needed to be said, on the record, in a courtroom, in front of anyone who needed to hear it. The trial date was set for late March. Olivia did not know the full details. She knew I was fighting for something important. She knew it was connected to what happened at Christmas. One evening, she found me at the kitchen table with my laptop open to a spreadsheet of transaction records, and she climbed into the chair beside me and asked if it was getting better. I told her it was getting clearer. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Grandpa Reginald liked me, didn't he? Like really liked me?" I closed the laptop and turned to face her. I said, "He thought you were one of the best people he had ever met. He told me so." She nodded, processing this. She said, "I miss him. He was nice to me even when no one else was." I took her hands in mine and held them. I told her that the people who are truly kind are worth more than all the people who are merely polite. She went to bed that night and I sat at the kitchen table and read Reginald's letter again, the handwritten one, the one he had left for me specifically. The part that stayed with me longest was near the end. He wrote, "I am sorry I did not do this more loudly while I was still here to do it. The quiet ones always think they have more time. We don't. Tell Olivia that her grandfather chose her, the same way you chose her, not because anyone told him to, but because she is worth choosing." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood panels and fluorescent lights and rows of benches that looked like they belonged in a school. Patricia was already at the plaintiff's table when James and I walked in. Her files organized, her expression composed. Raymond sat behind us, separated from the defense table where Nancy sat with Gerald in his expensive suit and his practiced composure. Claire sat 2 rows back. Thomas Marsh, James's brother, had flown in from Portland. He sat beside Raymond. The 2 brothers had seen each other once in the past year. A careful, awkward meeting at a hotel lobby in the city that James had described to me as the longest 90 minutes of my life, in a good way. Nancy scanned the room. She saw her husband on the other side. She saw her daughter sitting behind the plaintiff. She saw her estranged son in the 3rd row. Something moved across her face that I had never seen there before. Judge Maria Okafor entered the courtroom and I liked her immediately. She had the manner of someone who had heard every variation of every story and was not interested in theatrics, but was deeply interested in facts. Patricia's opening was precise and devastating. She said this case was about a woman entrusted with her husband's father's legacy who had used that position to erase a child from her grandfather's wishes and spend the funds meant for 3 children's futures on herself. She said the evidence was clear, the pattern was documented, and the harm to a 9-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong except exist in a family that decided she was inconvenient was real and ongoing. The documentary evidence came first. Each document entered, each transaction marked, each signature identified. Gerald objected intermittently. Judge Okafor overruled most of it without apparent effort. When Patricia called Claire to the stand, Nancy did not look at her daughter once during the entire testimony. Claire's voice was steady. She described being directed to sign the amendment paperwork without reading it. She described being told not to discuss the trust with anyone. She described, quietly and without drama, the moment she discovered her mother had forged her signature on a mortgage document. When Patricia played the recordings, the courtroom went still. Reginald's voice, that quiet, deliberate voice, filled the room. His words about Olivia, his words about wanting her protected, the final recording, his voice weaker, and Nancy's answer, "Once you're gone, it won't matter what you wanted." Someone in the gallery was crying. I think it was Thomas. Gerald put Nancy on the stand. She was composed, prepared. She talked about managing the trust responsibly, about family legacy, about what her husband would have truly wanted. Her voice was controlled and her answers were rehearsed, and she looked directly at the judge. Patricia's cross-examination was short and surgical. She asked Nancy to explain why the original trust contained no biological requirement if Reginald had truly intended to limit the beneficiaries by blood. Nancy said she had interpreted his wishes. Patricia produced Reginald's notes. His exact words, "Olivia is to remain on the trust." Nancy said he had been confused. Patricia played the recording. Nancy said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, with something finally cracking in her voice, that she had been protecting her family's legacy. Patricia said, "From a 9-year-old girl?" The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Okafor's ruling was comprehensive. Nancy was removed as trustee immediately. Full restitution of all misappropriated funds, $368,000 plus interest, ordered, to be funded through liquidation of personal assets including her home. Additional penalties for breach of fiduciary duty. The matter referred to the district attorney's office for consideration of criminal fraud charges, and Reginald's original beneficiary list restored in full with an independent trustee appointed. When the gavel fell, I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally been allowed to set it down. James found me in the hallway. He wrapped his arms around me and said, "It's done." I held on to him and said, "The hard part is done." Those are different things, and we both knew it. Outside the courthouse, Thomas was waiting on the steps. He and James stood there for a moment, and then Thomas said, "She did it to me too, just differently." And James said, "I know. I'm sorry it took me this long to say that out loud." Thomas nodded. They didn't hug. They stood there side by side looking out at the street, the way brothers do when they are finding their way back to something they don't have a word for yet. That was 4 months ago. Olivia is thriving. That is the word her teacher used at the last parent conference, and I held it the way you hold something precious. Thriving. She is louder than she was before. She takes up space. Last week she told me with great authority that her science project was going to be the best one in the class, and the certainty in her voice was so ordinary, so effortless, that I had to leave the room for a moment so she wouldn't see me cry. She asked me recently what Grandpa Reginald was like when he was young. I told her I didn't know him then. She said she wished she had more time with him. I told her that the time they had mattered. She said, "He came and sat with me at that barbecue when all the other kids were in the pool. He just sat with me and asked me about my book." I said, "That's who he was." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think he really saw me." She was right. He did. James and Thomas have spoken 4 times in the past month. They are not repaired yet. That is too simple a word for what they are. But they are talking, and that is something that would not have existed without everything that happened. Raymond finalized his divorce in October and called James from a small town in Colorado where he had rented a cabin to figure out what the next chapter of his life looked like. He sounded, James said, like a man breathing real air for the first time. Nancy lost the house to the restitution order. She is in an apartment now, somewhere across the city. She came to our door once in September. She was smaller than I remembered. She was holding a wrapped gift. She asked to see Olivia. I told her no. She said she had made mistakes. She said people could change. I told her that maybe they could, but she would not be practicing that change on my daughter. She cried on the porch. I could hear it through the door after I closed it. I did not open it again. Inside the gift was a children's book about family. The inscription read, "To Olivia, with love." I held it for a long time thinking about those 2 words. With love. She had used them. I don't know what they meant to her. I know what they didn't include. For 3 years of photographs and dinner tables and Christmas mornings, and I know what Reginald understood that she never did. You don't love someone with conditions. You don't love someone with exceptions. You love them or you don't, and everything else is just paperwork. I put the book in a box in the closet. Maybe someday Olivia will want to read it. Maybe she will want to understand the grandmother who could have known her and chose not to, or maybe she will never ask. Either way, the choice will be hers to make on her own terms when she is ready. That is the only thing I have ever wanted for her. Her choices. Her terms, her belonging, not as something she has to earn from people who keep moving the line, but as something that is simply already hers. Reginald knew that. He protected it the only way he could from where he was, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it too. Last week I was putting Olivia to bed and she asked me out of nowhere, "Mom, do you think I belong in this family?" I looked at her. 9 years old, with her hair in 2 braids and her rocket ship pajamas and the stuffed elephant Reginald had given her sitting on the pillow beside her. I said, "You are the reason this family exists." She thought about it for a second, the way she thinks about things she wants to be sure of. Then she nodded. Then she said okay, and reached up and turned off her bedside lamp herself, which is a new thing she has started doing recently. This small, casual claim of independence that makes my heart ache and expand at the same time. She is thriving. We all are. I used to think patience was the same thing as kindness. That if I just kept showing up, kept swallowing the small cruelties, kept smoothing things over for the sake of everyone's comfort, eventually the people who were making my daughter invisible would somehow come around. I believed that for 3 years. 3 years of Christmases and birthdays and family dinners where Olivia sat carefully and spoke politely and asked me in the car on the way home if she had done something wrong. She never had. That was the thing I had to learn to stop explaining and start acting on. What happened to Nancy was not something I did to her. It was the result of everything she chose to do, over years, thinking no one was watching closely enough to document it. Reginald watched. He documented it the only way available to him, quietly, carefully, from a position of limited power. And he trusted that someone would eventually pick up what he left behind. That someone turned out to be me, but only because I finally stopped assuming the best and started looking at what was actually in front of me. I think about that a lot. How long I looked away. How I told myself that Olivia was fine, that she was resilient, that children bounce back. She is resilient. She is fine now. But resilience is not the same as not being hurt, and I spent too long confusing the two. The real turning point was not the Christmas dinner, not the slap, not even finding the trust documents. The real turning point was the night Olivia asked me if she was not real family, and I realized she had been carrying that question for a very long time without asking it out loud. A 9-year-old should not have to carry that. That weight belongs to the adults who put it on her, and it was time for them to carry it themselves. Raymond surprised me. I think he surprises himself too, still. 31 years is a long time to stay silent, and I do not say that as a condemnation. I understand now, having watched James work through his own version of the same thing. That fear of losing what you love can make cowards of genuinely decent people. What I believe is that decency, when it is real, eventually finds its way out. Raymond found his way out the day Olivia hit the floor. It took that. It should not have taken that. But it happened, and he chose right when it mattered, and that choice cost him something real. And I respect it, the thing about consequences. True consequences, the kind that come not from vengeance but from accountability, is that they require the truth to be visible. Nancy operated for decades in a structure that protected her from visibility. No one looked at the accounts. No one compared the numbers. No one connected the silence around Thomas's disappearance to the quiet erasure of Olivia from the family photographs. Once it was visible, once the documents were on the table and Reginald's voice was in the room, there was nothing left to manage. What I want Olivia to understand when she is old enough, and she is already, honestly, old enough to understand more than I give her credit for, is that her grandfather saw her clearly from the beginning. He did not wait to be told she was worth protecting. He decided on his own that she was. That is the kind of person worth being, not the loudest one in the room, not the one with the most power. The one who sees a child sitting alone at a barbecue and goes and sits beside her and asks about her book. We do not always get to choose who sees us, but we get to choose who we see us. I choose Olivia, every day, without conditions.